Welcome on in, everyone. It's Malliem back with another weekly horror story. If you've got a story you'd like to share, feel free to post it to my subreddit linked below. We're picking up where we left off with Moth Boy, Part 3, the finale. If you enjoy the show, hit that sub button for me. It helps a lot. Thanks! The year was 2018. 6 years after the prison riot that had Moth Boy sent to a forensic psychiatric hospital. My daughter had just turned 7 years old, and my life had settled into a comfortable, yet unpredictable pattern. There was always something to keep an eye on, something to adapt to. A sudden illness, a change in schedule. My wife was working at a company that was about to go public on the stock market, and they were preparing to step into franchising. As a result, she had to travel a lot, leaving me as a sole caretaker back home. I didn't mind, but it was another change of pace. I hadn't expected to be contacted by Mrs. Short. I hadn't heard from her in years, and we'd gone our separate ways as professionals, agreeing to disagree on the proper actions to take. I had advised for Herman to rot in isolation at maximum security prison, while she had settled him into a rehabilitation program. Now, those places are no walk in the park, especially at the level Moth Boy was settled, but it still kept that frustrating possibility of him someday walking free. Mrs. Short sent me an email. Names are omitted for reasons of privacy. It read, "Dear Mr. I hope this email reaches you well. I write to you regarding the matter of Herman. After 6 years of improvement, the possibility of having him admitted to a more open facility has been put on the table. It is my professional opinion that this request be granted. The progress shown has been astounding, and with a more open floor facility, I think this particular patient can be given a proper chance of rehabilitation. I write to you because it is the opinion of the board that the patient be granted this opportunity by 3 separate, independent investigators. 2 have already begun their work, and you have been requested by name to perform the 3rd and conclusive statement. Your experience with the patient gives you a unique perspective that the board wishes to utilize. It is my honest hope that you will be able to set aside personal biases in order to perform this investigation to the best of your professional ability. But because of the nature of your relationship, you can discuss a possible reassignment with your supervisor. Consider this an optional opportunity. Best regards, Short. P.S. I personally believe you will be pleasantly surprised by the improvements shown." I had no intention of declining this opportunity. I would have a chance to keep Moth Boy behind lock and key for a little longer, and I was going to take it. Mrs. Short had gone over my head years ago to put him in this position, and I knew all the way back then that it was going to turn into a nightmare somehow. This was a man who had brutally murdered people based on nothing but whims and vague assumptions. Human life was insignificant to him. So I accepted. It was going to be a bit of a drive, but my neighbor had a daughter who would be willing to babysit for me. She'd done it before, so it wouldn't be much of a problem. She got along great with my daughter. I prepared myself with what little information I had readily available. The following Monday, I was on my way to see the infamous Moth Boy once again. Herman was about 24 years old by then. Nurses considered him a calming presence. Not a lot of patients dread stepping up to a 6'8" man with a penchant for violence. His hair had grown longer in the pictures, and I could see he was a bit skinnier. He probably wasn't eating or exercising as well as he had in prison. Notes spoke about his various improvements. Him joining a book circle, helping out in the garden, and fostering a close friendship with some of the other violent offenders. It looked great on paper, but in the context of Moth Boy, it soured my gut. This was a man who always planned ahead, and who could let his ideas fester for years. Mrs. Short would have an uphill battle to fight, but I would try to be open-minded. I'd try. But it'd be a cold day in hell before I let that man out of his chains. A forensic psychiatric hospital has many similarities to a prison. It is a highly controlled environment, but the interior is made to provide comfort and a neutral tone. There's not supposed to be anything to set a patient off. Simple colors, inoffensive artwork, calm voices, and engaging activities. I had to get myself checked in, surrendering my service weapon, my shoes, my watch, my electronics, and my keys. I was also offered a white coat, something simple and bright. I hadn't been in a lab coat since college, so it felt a bit like coming home. I was escorted through the main hall by one of the orderlies. He excused himself as he went off to find Mrs. Short for me, leaving me alone for a couple of minutes. I noticed a man sitting by himself a little further down the hall. He was in his early 50s, maybe late 40s. He had short salt and pepper hair and a wrinkled, troubled face far beyond his years. He was on the shorter side, somewhere around 5'2", 5'3", and stared intently at a thin booklet. He looked up at me with a smile, shut the booklet, and got up from his chair. He was clearly one of the patients. He stopped a couple feet away, waved again, and spoke to me in a low tone. "Hey, he said. "You new doctor?" "Just visiting," I said. "I won't be long. Consider me an observer." "Well, Mr. Observer, I'm Callahan. Let me know if you need anything." They had been told to avoid physical contact, something which Callahan seemed intently aware of. He kept his distance and made no attempt at a handshake. "What are you reading there?" I asked. "Oh, I can't read. It's just practice. Trying to fit the words with the pictures." "That's gotta be tough. A lot of people take that for granted." "Words are crazy, crazy things," he said, shaking his head. I mean, not crazy. Ill-aligned." He cocked his head a little, tapping the booklet against his head playfully. "My daughter has just started reading," I said. "It's difficult to step back and look at things with a fresh perspective. When you've been reading for as long as I have, you can't imagine life without it." "Yes," he exclaimed, pointing at me. "Exactly. Like, why does Apple have two identical symbols when they're just describing one thing? It's weird, right?" "Very weird," I nodded. "I bet she's smart. Real smart. Just like you." His smile froze as his eyes drifted, like he was looking into me, past me. And after a few seconds, his voice lowered, the words drifting out like a sigh. "I bet she's great." Mrs. Short joined me shortly after. The orderly assisted Callahan to a meeting. "They're having a book circle," Mrs. Short explained. "He can't read, but he likes to listen in. It's a stress management thing." "Isn't Moth Boy in that too?" The files mentioned it. "It's just Herman now. We don't call him that anymore." She rolled her eyes a little at herself and offered up a surrendering shrug. "But yes," she admitted, "he's in the book circle. Callahan helps him with the printing." "Printing?" "Yes. Herman shares a couple of passages from books he's read in the library every now and then. We don't have copies for everyone, so we ask Callahan to print them up. The two of them are inseparable." I remembered the last person who'd been close to Herman. It ended with a slit throat in the back of a pantry. But Mrs. Short already knew this, so I kept my mouth shut. I was taken to her office one floor up. My borrowed plastic shoes squeaked against the chlorine-smelling floor. Everything was controlled. No open sockets, no sharp corners, no locks on public doors or bathrooms. Fluorescent lights made the eggshell walls look pale. She unlocked the door to her office. Looking further down the hall, I could hear people speaking in unison. Seems the book club was on the second floor. "You're welcome to use this space," Mrs. Short said. "I left a key in the reception for you." "So this is all about evaluating your work, then? That's all this is?" She crossed her arms with a sigh. Yes, you're here to evaluate the work I've done for 6 years, and I can't say I'm enthusiastic about my chances here. She picked up a folder from her desk and a USB drive. She handed them over reluctantly. 0 incidents, 0 complaints, 6 years. By far the most outstanding result we have. And yet, it all relies on... She waved her hand casually at me. As she sat down in her office chair, I noticed a sway to her, like she'd had a drink or slept too little. You know where I stand on this, I said. Yes, I do. I'm painfully aware, which is why I've been trying to put this off for months, hoping they'd settle for someone else. Anyone else, really. So why didn't they? Why settle for someone they know is going to be biased? She pointed to the folder. Herman asked for you. I spent most of the day getting to know the facility. I checked out the gardens in the backyard, where patients could care for their plants behind the safety of a tall wall and an armed guard. I didn't get a chance to see the book circle, but it was described as a stress management tool. Whenever a new or sudden change came about, the patients were called upon to participate in a group reading. Intense concentration on a single task seemed to help, as a coping mechanism. There was a cafeteria-style room where they ate, collectively, with paper cutlery and disposable plates. Those who couldn't eat as a group were allowed to return to their chambers if there was no inherent safety issue to consider. There was isolation cells and temporary holding rooms, a small library, a recreation room, an art room, and a space for visiting family members to come by. My first interview with Herman was scheduled for that afternoon. It was to be the first of at least 3, with the possibility of a follow-up if necessary. I prepared my questions, my notes, and the interview space. I had to make sure I had quick access to the door, at least 2 nurses on standby, and nothing in the room that could immediately be used as a weapon. It was easier said than done. Moth Boy was clever, and he wanted to hurt me. And if he wanted to hurt me, there'd be little that could stop him. As 3 p.m. rolled around, there was a knock on the door. There was a tall shadow on the other side of the frosted glass. The door opened. Herman didn't look that different from last time I'd seen him. Much like in the pictures, he was a bit thinner, but he was still every bit as tall. His hair had grown longer, almost reaching the length of his arm. But his eyes were still dead, and there wasn't even a hint of emotion on his face. He ducked through the door, straightened out, and glanced at me. I pointed at an armchair across the room. He had what looked like an iPad under his arm, probably a text-to-speech tool. He sat down, and I joined him. I took a deep breath. I could see the 2 nurses waiting outside, both with pepper spray and tasers if need be. But Moth Boy, Herman, seemed different. After a couple of seconds, he tapped his screen. A mechanical voice with a British intonation spoke from the cheap speakers.
I want to apologize.
Is that why you requested me? I asked.
I want fair judgment.
He continued.
You can provide that.
I gave the words a couple of seconds to sink in, then nodded. Then you know I'm not inclined to help you. I've seen what you can do when given the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
I'm inclined to believe I'm here for some other purpose. Something nefarious.
I understand.
So what is different? What has happened in these past few years that has changed your perspective? He pondered the question for a bit, then tapped away at the screen. But this time, there was no voice. Instead, he showed a picture. It was an old, turn-of-the-century leather-bound book, along with some simple hand-drawn illustrations. Fable-style animals dressed in the style of the Civil War era. Smoking pipes, cutting apple pies with a sable, riding horse-drawn carriages. Looking a little closer, I could see the title of the book. Adventures of Friendly Foxman and Meanie the Moth, I read aloud. Herman held his hand out, and I returned his pad. He tapped away.
My earliest memory.
It read.
I remember now.
You remember your childhood?
Yes.
If true, that would have been a breakthrough in and of itself. We knew little to nothing about Herman's early years. He'd been found wandering along the highway as a child, and no one had come to claim him. He wasn't missed. He didn't even have a name. I asked Herman a lot of questions about his family. He explained how he remembered a nice home by the river. He'd had a room on the second floor where he would read. His favorite book about the Friendly Foxman and Meanie the Moth, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Our first interview passed in a flash. Herman was much easier to communicate with now, despite the text-to-speech tablet. It surprised me. There were no tricks. He hadn't taken a thing from the room. He hadn't left anything. He'd just come in, done the interview, and walked out. But I had to consider that this was exactly the behavior he would need to exhibit in order for me to agree to a lighter rehabilitation program. And he was manipulative. I was impressed, but not convinced. And I think he knew that. When I got home that night, I paid the babysitter and ended up spending hours on my laptop. My daughter fell asleep watching cartoons, so I had to carry her to bed. I ended up sitting on a chair in her room, scrolling past page after page of old American fables. I wanted to check this book out for myself, see if it explained something about his behavior. I'd emailed Mrs. Short about it earlier, and just before midnight, I got a response. "We have a copy of it in the library," she wrote, "but it's a later edition and some stories have been cut. We don't have the first edition. It's made by this obscure Danish-American author that mostly wrote about philosophy and pseudoscience." The author was E.A. Rask. It was a peculiar name, but easy to search for. But it didn't take me long to realize it would be a nightmare to sift through all the overlapping information. It was like trying to read about a politician's taste in cheese. It's rarely noticed after a lifetime of public service. Likewise, E.A. Rask's children's books were rarely ever mentioned, even on dedicated sites. Not that there was a lot of them. They were his least known works. I returned a couple of days later. I met Callahan in the hallway. He asked me about my health and the health of my family. It sounded like small talk. There was something about the way he said it that made me take a step back. But he was observant. I'll give him that. "Do you wear a watch?" he asked. "Usually, I mean." "I do, yes. How'd you know?" "You keep pulling on your coat. People who wear watches do that." I gave him a curious look, and he groaned apologetically. "I used to pick them. Steal. The mechanical ones with the click locks. It was easy money." "Well, I hope you won't pick mine." No, that was a long time ago. Long time. When I get out, you'll see. Changed man walking." He held his head high. From the looks of it, he seemed to be a reformed man, pleasant enough to have a conversation with. But I had to remember that these people were in there for a reason. I was sure they'd gone through hardships of their own, but that didn't mean you can let your guard down. Callahan might well have trained to exploit lapses of judgment. Before my next interview with Herman, I had a run-in with Mrs. Short. She was visibly exhausted, having her third coffee and getting her fingers stuck in her tousled hair. She didn't pay me much attention, instead focusing on another email. Probably a last-ditch effort to throw me out of the process. We didn't exchange many words, but I brought up the curious children's book. "We got a copy in the library," she said. "He brings it to the book circle sometimes. It's harmless, really." "You don't see some kind of connection between it and his fascination with moths?" "Of course, but the stories are harmless. It's just a clever fox and a mean moth. There's no subtext here. I'll have to see it anyway. It seems important to him." She looked up, scratching her nose. "So, you're really looking into this? You're not just giving it a no and going home?" "I'm looking," I admitted. "I'm not convinced, but I'm looking." She pushed away her keyboard and leaned back with her coffee cradled between her hands. She took a deep breath, sucking in the smell. "If there's anything I can do, please let me know. This is important." I met Herman that afternoon again. He'd just returned from the garden, leaving him with dirty stains on his knees and little red spots on his hands from handling thorns. He was particularly fond of the white roses and the unusual blue sunflowers. "I tried to look into the book you mentioned," I said. "You said you had one of the original copies, a first edition."
Yes.
Herman wrote.
It was dear to me.
"I've been trying to see if I can find one of the original copies," I said. "Perhaps that could make me understand you better." Something moved in his eyes, a slight frown.
No need.
He wrote.
We have a copy.
Right, but I was told that wasn't an original. There might be stories missing.
It's fine.
I think it's important that we consider.
It's fine.
His shoulders rose and fell. He was having an emotional response. There was a tingle of something in his face, like a twitch waiting to take over, just under the surface of his skin. It made me think back on all the things I'd seen him do. I'd never seen him have an emotional reaction to anything, not even murder. I decided to call it early. Herman shook his head.
No.
He wrote.
We're not done.
We're done, I insisted. We'll talk tomorrow.
No.
He stood up. As he did, his legs brushed the table, almost knocking it over. A couple of papers and a pen clattered to the floor as the two nurses hurried inside. Herman looked at them, then at me. We'll talk tomorrow, I repeated. I have important work to do. He looked at me with what I can only describe as anger. I'd touched a nerve. This was progress. Mrs. Short was eager to help me now that she saw that I could possibly be persuaded. I didn't know for a fact that this was the case, but I couldn't help but to be intrigued. This had to mean something. She asked the other investigators if they'd had any similar breakthroughs or if they'd found anything about the curious book. One of the investigators responded. It was originally printed under a pseudonym, Emmett Olson, the author's mother's maiden name, I think. I know there was a copy by a collector, but it was locked into evidence after an arson incident. I had a lead. It was exciting to do some work like back in the day, when I'd been involved with the police. I still had a couple of contacts, and with just the right words, I might be able to get somewhere. I ended up spending the remaining day on my phone. The arson itself was easy to look up. There was a collector with dozens of books by this peculiar author locked up in evidence. Apparently, the collector had tried to burn it all. One of his colleagues, a Dr. Bogan, had been the one to call the police. If she hadn't, the whole collection would have been reduced to ashes. Later that evening, I was on the phone with one of the officers responsible for the evidence lockup. The case had been cold for a couple of years now, but he couldn't just hand it out. I'll talk to the chief, he said. maybe I can make a copy. And by morning, I had a PDF of the first edition of Emmett Olson's The Friendly Foxman and Meanie the Moth. I sent out an email to the other investigators. They all wanted a copy to draw their own conclusions. I read through it as well. It was mostly harmless little as things should be kind of fables. Stories about helping each other, about being kind, about sharing. There was the friendly foxman, a clever but mischievous protagonist who didn't mind bending the truth for a perfect outcome. Then there was Meanie the Moth, a bitter, dark-dwelling creature who was as mean as he was lonely. I didn't know what to make of it. Sure, Meanie the Moth was a clear antagonist, but there was nothing to explain how this related to Herman. Even at his worst, Meanie the Moth was at most bitter. He didn't hurt the other animals. Not like Herman did. Later that afternoon, I had my third interview with Herman. He'd calmed down since we last spoke, but I could tell he had something to say. The moment he sat down in that armchair, he started typing.
Do you have it?
He asked. I found it, yes.
Can I see it?
I had printed a copy. It was just 60 pages and the text was really big. It was intended for children, after all. I let him have a look. He turned to the last story, and for the first time, I saw Herman smile. There was a spark in his eye. After reading it, he got back to tapping on his screen.
This is my favorite,
he wrote, pointing at the last story. It was just a cute story about a butterfly being mistaken for a moth, and Meanie was really disappointed at how much better it was treated by the other animals. The story ended with the friendly foxman telling him that if Meanie was as nice as the butterfly, the animals would like him too.
Can I borrow this?
He asked.
I want to read it to Callahan.
Sorry, no, I said, putting the copy away. I'm not at liberty to give you anything. He accepted it begrudgingly. As our interview ended for the day, he got up and extended his hand. I know it was wrong to accept a handshake, but I figured he knew too. It was him showing that he was aware of taking a risk to be accepted, if only by me. I shook his hand as my heart skipped a beat. In another world, he would have thrown me to the floor and snapped my neck. But he didn't. I spent hours with that book. My daughter was curious about it too, and I let her read 2 of the early chapters before bedtime. She really liked the characters. Her favorite was Prudence the parrot, the friendly foxman's book-loving neighbor. Reading about the stories online, there was a bit of confusion. Apparently, the stories differed from one version to another. Despite being published after the author's passing, the stories were vastly different from the first edition to the third. A few people who spoke about it online described stories that I hadn't seen. It made me think there might be yet another version. I couldn't make sense of it. Somehow these innocent tales of friendship, responsibility, and common sense had affected Herman to the point where he'd adopted some kind of persona based on it. What was I missing? The next day, there was a bit of turmoil at the facility. I dropped off my belongings at the reception and was ushered into Mrs. Short's office on the 2nd floor. I could tell she was stressed, rifling through her items in a hurry. Looking for something? I asked. She shook her head, dismissing whatever she was doing. Her desk was a minefield of carefully crafted proposals and reports. We got a missing patient, she said. It's a bit of a mess right now. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen Callahan. He was usually there in the mornings. A knot turned in my stomach. Callahan, right? How do you know? Callahan had been close to Herman. Now he was missing. It followed the same pattern as Dawn from the prison back in 2012, and Dawn had ended up with a slit throat in the back of a pantry. I could see why Mrs. Short was worried and answered my question before I could ask it. "Yes, we've kept an eye on Herman," she said. "It's not him. Not this time." "You sure?" I asked. "You checked their common spaces?" "They're going through the garden right now," she said. "The others are up in the book circle trying to keep calm." She straightened her back and looked me in the eye. "I need you to talk to Herman. He speaks to you more than anyone. See if you can find something out." I agreed, conditionally. I refused to be alone with him. The nurses would have to stay in the room this time. People were running down the halls. Some of the patients were responding poorly to the heightened tension. Those who weren't huddled in the book circle upstairs were either stuck in their rooms or put in isolation. I could hear the squeaky plastic shoes pitter-patter up and down the corridors as pained voices rose and fell. It felt electric, like that moment before the prison riot. I knew it was too good to be true. This had Moth Boy written all over it. Herman was already in the room by the time I got there. Mrs. Short had asked for him to be kept under strict supervision. He didn't seem to mind. The two nurses joined me in the room, standing on either side of the door. I got straight to the point. "I assume you know about our missing patient."
Yes.
"Are you the one responsible this time, Herman?" He shook his head.
You are.
"Well, that's a new one," I admitted. "What did I do to make poor Callahan disappear?" Herman didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at his hands. He took a deep breath and tapped at his screen again.
Do you know which story is my favorite?
"The last one," I said. "Like you told me the other day."
Your last one, or my last one?
"What do you mean?" He held out a hand, asking me to give him my copy of the book. I did. He held it up, showing me the final story in the many images. "It's just like I remembered it,"
Now watch.
he wrote. He closed the book, put his hands on it, and then opened it again. This time when he held it up, the title was different. I took it from him, blinking at the page. New artwork, dialogue, an entirely different story.
That is my favorite.
He said.
Very good.
Meanie the Moth and the Magic Lantern. The story followed Meanie the Moth on his quest to find his family. He had found a magic lantern, but he couldn't light it. He invited all the friends of the forest to help him, but no matter how much they tried, they couldn't light it. Not Prudence the Parrot, not Friendly Foxman. And as they left, one by one, Meanie was left alone once again. "Of all the lamps that never shone, you are the meanest, and none shall ever contest it," Meanie proclaimed. And that was the trick. The lamp was mean. So it would take the meanest animal in the forest to light it. So the story showed the many ways Meanie did evil things over the years, how he teased and pushed the other animals. And when he was finally the meanest of them all, he lit the magic lantern. The story showed Meanie holding up the lit lantern, calling for the other moths to see it. And there, on the horizon, was the biggest moth he'd ever seen. The meanest, the coldest, the ugliest one of them all. And they would be the best of friends. And in the final panel, you see the Friendly Foxman looking up at the sky as a pair of wings blot out the sun. The story ended on an eerie portrait of wide-open eyes being consumed by the dark. My hands were shaking. I looked up at one of the nurses and handed them the book. "Check the last story," I said. "Check it." They flipped the pages, then showed me. It was another story now. Friendly Foxman and the Curious Caterpillar. I handed it to the next nurse, then looked back at Herman. "That's impossible," I said. "How do you do that?"
I am very mean.
He wrote.
The meanest in the forest.
Books couldn't change. We read books, they don't read us. But no matter the source of the trick, that story showed something about Herman. Something he hadn't shown us before. You're gonna light a lantern, like in the story. A magic lantern.
Yes.
I don't see you doing that anytime soon, Herman. I see you being locked in here for a long time. He nodded, then tapped the screen again.
Too late.
The nurses put away the book and took a step forward. In an explosion of movement, Herman flipped the table at them. One of them fell backward, taking the full brunt of the force on their right wrist. Herman reached across the flipped table, grabbing the other nurse and pulling him across like a wet towel. His shot went wild. I fumbled to the floor, taking the other taser from the nurse with the sprained wrist. I called out for him to go get help, and they scrambled out the door. By the time I looked up, Herman was beating the other nurse within an inch of his life, reducing half of the man's face to meat. I raised the taser, coming face to face with Herman, who opened his mouth in response. He spat at me. A spatter of paper tissue, larvae, and stinging caterpillars showered me. One of the caterpillars stung the corner of my eye, causing a painful burn to trickle up the side of my face. All these years, his mouth had just been another weapon. This was how the moths kept popping up around him. He'd turned his body into a nest. This was why he didn't speak, why he refused to eat in the common hall. He was honing a last-ditch weapon. He was spitting his namesake in my face to win another fight. I was completely off balance, and by the time I opened my eyes, he had one hand to my throat and one hand on the taser. His mouth was wide open, showing a tapestry of scars, paper, and blood. Most of his teeth were black or missing. His tongue was as white as the larvae he hosted. He took me in a chokehold and pulled me into the hallway. Something had happened. People were screaming and throwing things. I could see other nurses and caretakers running in the halls, heading for the exit. But Herman was taking me in the other direction, to the book circle. The thought hit me that I hadn't seen Mrs. Short's copy of the book on her desk. I hadn't seen Callahan either. And I knew for a fact that whenever something happened, the book circle was supposed to read something to calm themselves down. I tried to twist and turn, but I could feel pressure on my neck that made me gasp for air. If he jerked me up, he could snap my neck. So step by step, I tried my best to just breathe. We entered the small library at the end of the corridor. 9 men sat in a circle, each with a copy of The Adventures of Friendly Foxman and Meanie the Moth. Callahan must have stolen it, copied it, and distributed it. Herman knew that when it all went to hell, they'd be right there, reading from today's stories. But listening to them, it didn't sound like someone reading a story at all. It was just noise. The story had changed. There were no pictures. There were no words, only symbols, some bearing a faint resemblance to the Roman alphabet. And yet, they read it in unison with perfect pronunciation. They'd been trained to do this, as a group, for years. This was it. This was what he'd planned. He'd failed that first time with Vicky the babysitter. He'd set her on fire as an attempt to light the magic lantern, the symbol of calling to something greater. But he'd failed. Perhaps, like in the story, he wasn't the meanest creature in the forest. Not yet. But now, it was different. He'd dedicated his life to manipulating, to wounding, to harming others in ways that would kill them or haunt them. And this time, he was asking all the creatures of his forest to help him, just like in the story. But in the end, it would be him doing it. and I'd given him the book to finish it. Maybe he knew there was a copy left in an evidence lockup. Maybe that's why he asked for me to begin with. He knew I could get to it. The chanted words were nonsense, but at the end of the story, there was a sound I'll never forget. In unison, they coughed out, "Yo, yo, yo." Herman took out a single matchstick from the back of his mouth. He dropped it in the middle of the book circle. Then he joined the others, and with his own voice, for the first time, he wheezed a word out. "Yo." The matchstick caught fire. A flame spread to the 9 men in a spiraling pattern, casting fluttering shadows across the walls. The smell brought me back all the way to 2002, lying next to a smoldering corpse on the bottom of an empty pool. The men didn't scream. It was as if they were dead already. I couldn't comprehend what kind of story the book had shown them. I pulled at Herman's arm as the flames reached us. He didn't let go. I stomped, trying to buy some time. "Let me go," I wheezed. "You don't need me. You're done." He blinked, then looked at me. There was something in his face that I hadn't seen. Perhaps he'd faked emotion to trick me into pursuing that book. It made sense. Pretending to be upset would just motivate me. But now, his emotions were real. A full, open-mouthed smile, as larvae dripped from his lip. "It's done," I repeated. "Just stop!" He was so full of joy. The flames danced in his eyes as the alarms began to scream. There were sirens approaching outside. And with that, he let me go. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice strained. "Thank you very much." I backed away as the flames grabbed him. He didn't look away. The smoke from the library tickled my lungs, and I burst into a sprint down the hallway. The nurse he'd beaten had been dragged out. There were trails of blood on the floor. I followed it, hoping it would lead me outside. Everything looks different in a panic. In the smoke. I made it outside, and into pandemonium. The air was so full of moths it could be mistaken for a mist. They'd come from the gardens, ushered into the air by the sudden fire. People were screaming, waving their arms, locking themselves in their cars. Police and firefighters were struggling to make it to the front, almost running over an orderly as they struggled to see. Mrs. Short was locked in her car in the parking lot, staring straight ahead with tear-stained eyes. We exchanged a glance as she shook her head, defeated. It was over. All her work and hopes, gone. I couldn't take my car home. I had left my keys in the reception, and I couldn't get them back until they had the fire under control. That would be hours. I ended up getting an escort from a police officer about an hour later. He was picking larvae from his uniform the whole ride, complaining about how he'd have to go through every inch of that car with a hose when this was over. The last thing I saw of the facility was a plume of smoke blotting out the sun, like a pair of dark, dusty wings. I was dropped off at home. I walked up to my door and sighed. I didn't have my keys, so it'd be locked. My daughter and the babysitter were home, though, so it ought to be fine. But the door was open. It shouldn't be. I poked the door open, listening. There was no one there. I could hear voices from upstairs. I looked into the kitchen for something to arm myself with. I didn't have my phone, and the officer who dropped me off was far gone by now. I reached for my knife block. only to realize one of the knives was already gone. I settled for a smaller one. My hand rattled so bad I almost dropped it. I forced my fingers to close into a cramp-like death grip. I crept up the stairs, holding my breath. I knew where to put my feet to avoid a creaking.
So he said birthdays? You still have those? And guess what? Guess what I said?
The voice was familiar, but unstable. Shaking. Callahan. I opened my daughter's bedroom door. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a kitchen knife. He was looking at the closet across the room. It had been cut and beaten, but was held closed. I could hear sniffling from the inside.
He said you can't have birthdays when you're old, Callahan rambled on. But that's stupid, right? Of course you can.
I tightened my grip on the knife. I could lunge at him, put it in his back. But something told me not to. Perhaps the tales of friendly foxmen had affected me more than I thought. "Callahan," I said, "what are you doing here?" He turned to me in wild surprise, but instead of lunging at me, he smiled from ear to ear. He got up, seemingly forgetting that he was holding a knife.
"Hey," he said, "I was just having a conversation with your lovely daughter."
"I need you to stop it, Callahan."
"But you said she was great. I thought we'd get along."
"You're scaring them." His smile faded as he looked down at his knife. He looked at the closet door, covered in cuts and bruises. He shook his head, as if just realizing what was going on.
Scaring them. Yes. Herman said it was okay."
"It's not," I said. "Now drop the knife." He did. I thought back on that moment in 2002, where I'd pointed my gun at a 10-year-old Herman. I hadn't pulled the trigger, and all the consequences that came after that decision could be traced back to me. Every prison murder, every twisted word and half-truth. Now I had a choice again, and I couldn't make my mind up.
"I'm sorry," said Callahan. "I thought it was okay."
And just like I'd done all those years ago, I let go. I took him downstairs. I hugged my daughter and had the babysitter call the police. It didn't take them long to come by and take Callahan into custody. They had him moved to a temporary facility, waiting for reassignment. He looked completely destroyed when they put him in the squad car. No screaming or fighting, just a quiet sobbing. It was long after midnight when the final car left my property. I sat by my daughter as she fell asleep. I went outside, sat down on the top of the stairs, and had a long talk with my wife. She called off her business trip and took the first flight home in the morning. When all was said and done, I looked at the forest across the yard. The swaying trees, singing along with the evening wind. Perhaps I was the same person now as I'd been back then, despite the innumerable horrors and twisted words. Maybe I was still the person who couldn't pull the trigger if push came to shove. But was it because I was a coward? Or because I believed in people? Did it matter? As I got up to head to bed, I noticed something on the driveway. Something metallic. It was my things from the reception. My service weapon, my wallet, my keys. They were a bit ashen, but they were mine. Nothing was missing. I looked up. I called out, but there was no one there. Just the flutter of something small by the tree line. Herman could have killed me, back in the library. He held me, waiting for the flames. But he'd had no reason to be mean anymore. His magic lantern was lit, and perhaps that was all he really cared for. Maybe that's why he let me go. Looking back at this, I think I know what kind of man I want to be. I want to be the one who can imagine a light in anyone's darkness. In Mrs. Short, in Callahan, and perhaps in a Moth Boy. They never found his body. The facility never got rid of the moths. Some claim that they saw Herman leaving in the company of a man. Others said they saw him burned to death in that library. And some claim to have seen him, years later, out and about as a free man. He was easy to spot in a crowd. Personally, I haven't seen or heard from him since. But every now and then, I hear the flutter of a moth. And I look to the sky. And if I look really hard, I can almost see two dusty wings, blotting out the sun.